All right. Welcome everybody to this month's Dinner with a Doc. We are so excited that you are here and we are so excited. Oh, and before we get started, I'll tell you a bit about who I am and then who my co-host is. And I'm just admitting somebody else here. Okay, hang on, you guys. Okay, so my name is Dawn Hutchins. I'm the owner of a company called VegeCooking, and I am a plant-based chef, and I love educating people about the benefits of plant-based nutrition and healthy cooking.
Yes, so I am Heather Borders. I am a registered dietitian and a personal chef, and yeah, I'm here in Jacksonville. I see people remotely, and we go in and we help people eat by cooking them really delicious, healthy food. So I'm very excited to be here. Dawn and I have had so much fun this year interviewing all the amazing physicians we have in Jacksonville who appreciate nutrition.
I know it has been really fun. Oh, look at all these people joining. Welcome everybody.
Oh, fun group today.
I know, very exciting. So I am really excited about this month's Dinner with a Doc because we are welcoming Dr. Jon Repole, who is the owner of Jacksonville Health and Wellness. And I personally have known Dr. Repole for, I think, probably 10 years now. And he's had such a huge impact in my own life. He's worked with me and my daughter and my mom. But really helping me with my daughter had the biggest impact on my life. When she was a toddler, she had these horrific food allergies and she would have this bloody eczema and these chronic ear infections. We were about to go on our third set of ear tubes. And I met Jon at Native Son, and I was telling him that her pediatricians, we'd gone through every antibiotic, we'd gone through all these steroid creams, we'd gone through like I said, having the ear tubes put in. And he's like, why don't you bring her by the office? And I've got a theory about what it could be. So I brought her in and had her looked at, and we basically determined that she had an autoimmune issue called leaky gut, which at the time, there was no such thing as leaky gut. It wasn't recognized really in the medical community. But following his protocols and with really a simple diet shift and just some simple supplements, and it was amazing. She actually had an ear infection when we started all the protocols, and the ear infection went away. She's now 14. She has never had another ear infection. She's very rarely sick, and no eczema anymore. And really most of the food allergies have gone away. So it was really life-changing. It's been so life-changing working with Dr. Repole. So welcome. And I'd love to have you tell us a little about yourself. So take it away, Dr. Repole.
Well, Dawn and Heather, thank you guys for inviting me. I really appreciate it. And I really admire the work that both of you guys are doing. And yeah, I am owner of Jacksonville Health and Wellness Center. I've had a passion for health forever, and my practice is, kind of morphed over the years. I got into functional medicine about 20 years ago when it wasn't really even a buzzword. I was listening to CDs from the father of functional medicine, Jeffrey Bland, in my car, and I was just, really drawn to the holistic aspect of treating. Conventionally today, as most people know, the way that we're treating patients as numbers, and we're not creating partnerships, and we're not coaching, and we are treating the symptoms and not looking to the cause. Our practice really has morphed to kind of really designed to take a patient from not just surviving, but really moving into kind of more of that thriving aspect. So we use like a 90-day protocol, and we try to touch all the different aspects where patients will let us on the physical, emotional, mental, relational, and spiritual. And we combine the best of ancient wisdom practices, plant-based nutrition, And more recently, we've been kind of adding in more biohacks and oxygen therapy and ozone treatments, which does not take the place of the most important treatment, which is the fundamentals. It's the old Stephen Covey principle: first things first, second things second. But still, the most important aspects are always going to be your diet, movement, self-care practices. But these other adjuncts, are really helpful for patients. And it's really good to be open-minded. I've been very open-minded over the years to try and continue to add things, to the practice. And so we're in our first phase. We completed renovations a couple months ago. And then next year, we're going to do our second renovation. We're going to add IV treatments, here to the office as well. And so, yeah, we're just trying to stay cutting edge. And like I said, my fallback, no matter where a patient is, if they're struggling, is always diet and lifestyle. That's really still the grounding and foundational practice. But yeah, that's my practice in a nutshell.
Awesome. All right. So really quickly, I just also wanted to mention that if anybody has questions as Dr. Repole goes through today, please feel free to write them in the chat. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see a thing that says chat. You can just click on it and type your question in there, either to everyone or privately through to Don or myself, and we will ask it without showing your name if you'd like to. So feel free to just write in there, tell us where you're from, or tell us if you have a question. So, all right. So this is technically called Dinner with a Doc. We always want to know what the doctors are cooking. And so Dr. Repole actually gave us 2 recipes. And so Dr. Repole, would you mind telling us about your recipes and just a little bit about them and why you like them?
Yeah, I chose the mushrooms because I think it's like the forgotten food group, the fungi kingdom. Mushrooms are, especially with the topic we'll talk about with autoimmunity and longevity, they have some really unique qualities and medicinal qualities. But, for starters, mushrooms, you kind of are usually used as a condiment in a lot of meals rather than as the meal itself. But mushrooms are loaded with B vitamins. They have antioxidants like selenium in them, as well as glutathione. And for those of you who don't know what antioxidant, I always, talk about them as like Pac-Man. They're the guys that go through the body, the good guys scavenging the bad guys, which are called the free radicals. But mushrooms contain glutathione, which is like one of the strongest antioxidants, in the human body. Particularly with autoimmunity and aging in general, they contain a fibrous substance called beta-glucan, which really is pretty amazing at immune modulating, especially the T killer cells in the body. And I can go on with mushrooms, but basically they are the recycling system of the earth. And there's even some interesting, evolutionary theories that due to some of those psychoactive compounds in mushrooms, that they helped with the evolution of our brain and consciousness over a period of time. So yeah, I chose mushrooms really to highlight some of the immune modulating effect, and really, like I said, it's a food group that is not really put in the center of dishes. It's oftentimes made as kind of more of a condiment. So
yeah. I made the mushrooms. They are pesto stuffed mushrooms. This is all that's left because I ate a lot of them. So I don't know if you guys can see these, but they were really good. And I am going to be sending out the recipe to everybody. So they have almonds, pepper, fresh basil, which I did from my garden. So the main recipe has the large mushrooms, the portobello mushrooms, the original recipe, but I did the little button mushrooms. They have garlic, lemon, nutritional yeast. I actually did these oil-free, and I just added a little water in the pesto, and these cooked up so beautifully. I really, really enjoyed them. And I think Heather made actually the smoothie recipe, right, Heather?
Smoothie. Yes.
Yeah, wow. It's very green.
I was gonna say, I am down in Miami visiting my mom, so I don't have the kitchen that, my personal kitchen. So there's minimal cooking this week, unfortunately, but she does have a blender. So I was able to make a smoothie. So I was very excited.
Oh, cool. Very cool.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I was gonna say the smoothie recipe is just, the idea is really to load up. We really encourage patients, which sometimes when they hear that, but 10 servings, vegetables a day. And usually when people hear that, they're like, what? But it's pretty easy to do. As you can see, that smoothie that Heather has is, probably loaded with, 5, 6, 7, 8 servings, of vegetables, and it's pretty easy to make. And hopefully it tastes okay. So.
Cool. Okay. So, all right, tell us about, before we get started with a discussion about autoimmunity and longevity, tell us about your plant-based, a little bit about your plant-based journey and how and why you chose to go plant-based.
So I grew up in a very strict, standard American Italian home. And I actually had the best of both worlds because my best friend, his father was a chiropractor. And when he got sick, he didn't go anywhere. It was an inherent trust in the wisdom of the human body. But when I got sick, it was like, Mom, immediately take me to the doctors. The ear infection, I need the antibiotic. And so I had these two diametrically opposed, healthcare systems that were in front of me the whole time. But I enrolled in chiropractic school, and about 3/4 of the way, my sister passed of iatrogenic disease. Most people are unaware. Iatrogenic means disease of medical era. It is today the second leading cause, depending on statistics, of death in the United States. So this is medical error, everything from drugs and different types of surgery and interactions and medical malpractice and so forth. And that really changed the trajectory of what I was about to embark on. And so I graduated and I was working for a multidisciplinary clinic alongside medical doctors and other physical therapists and chiropractors and nutritionists. And I would go to the library every single day and I was doing research because I'm like, I wanted to know the secret to health. And I picked up a book called Diet for a New America by Jon Robbins. And I opened it and it was talking vegetarianism. And I'm like, this is just ridiculous. And I put it back. And I continued to do my own, self-study and research. And, about 6 months later, it led me right back to that book because the research is pretty clear that the more fruits and vegetables you add in the diet, and there really is no upper limit, but the more fruit and vegetables you add into your diet, the healthier a person gets, right? And so I, right there and then, embraced, plant-based. And again, the key word, obviously you guys talk about too, but the key word is really a whole foods diet, right? We're not talking about, processed, plant-based, foods, but I embraced it. And my biggest struggle was, how was I going to deliver this to patients? Because I felt so strongly about it. And that has really morphed over the years where my confidence has grown and different ways to kind of approach different people, because I remember my own resistance initially hearing about it. But yeah, I embraced it, right there and then. And if you were to ask me today, what's the reason I'm plant-based or vegan, it would be almost impossible to differentiate between the health benefits, the animal benefits, and the environmental, because at some point along the journey, they kind of get, twisted and all kind of put together. But yeah, I still remember the day I was sitting in my house and I was reading a book, and I was reading a story in one of the Jon Robbins books, and I started crying, realizing that everything that I was doing had a consequence. for my health, for my family, for my patients, for the animals. And it just like was an aha moment almost immediately. And I never looked back, and it was like the best decision for me. So, so that was about almost 20 years ago or so.
Okay, so today we've heard a lot of people over the last few months on various topics. And so today we asked Dr. Repole to tell us a little bit more about both longevity and autoimmune health. So for the next little while, he's going to talk about that. And again, if you have questions, just write them in the chat. I know that for my practice, I have a lot of patients with autoimmune disease that affects all areas of health, even areas that you wouldn't expect. So things like brain fog and headaches and, skin issues, joint issues, muscle issues, in addition to GI stuff too. So, autoimmune affects everything. So I'm really excited about today, and I'm very interested to hear what you've seen in your practice and maybe a little bit of what is going on in the most recent research. So, yeah.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yep,
Okay,
go ahead.
cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So the topic, that I had proposed was, linking autoimmunity with aging and longevity. And I think for reasons in a moment it will be apparent. There's actually a huge connection, the two. So just to kind of create a tiny framework, right? Autoimmunity, for people who are on the call who don't know what that is, your immune system is attacking self. And so, it can be, as an example, we have, you send out the airplanes over to another country to attack, and they come back and they start attacking the United States, right? So depending on where in the body they attack, we're going to get a named diagnosis of autoimmunity. So the thyroid, Hashimoto's, Grape's disease, the myelin sheath, we call it MS, GI, Crohn's, eczema on the skin. So there's all these different, type of, named, diagnoses that come along with autoimmunity. But when you think about aging, there's some, thought process that we should reverse the idea and begin to embrace aging as a disease. So in other words, we're oftentimes attacking diseases, whether it's, diabetes or heart disease. And the thing with attacking these different diseases is that we may want to start looking at the mechanisms behind all of that, because there's a commonality. So as an example, the most fundamental processes of the human body is to combine oxygen and sugar to make energy. And so sugar regulation, oxygen utilization, whether or not we're turning things into rust in the body called oxidation, inflammation, most people have heard of. But the interesting thing is, when you start doing blood work, and we've seen, over 10,000 patients over the years. And when you do blood work, almost everybody walking in, their biomarkers for autoimmunity are on. So, but they don't have necessarily a named diagnosis. And so when you look at aging, it truly is a degenerative process where your body is being attacked and you're beginning to have advanced degeneration. That, in essence, is an autoimmune condition. So we can look at aging through a lens of quote unquote autoimmunity. And they're even doing this with cancer too, thinking of cancer, in the sense that it is, in essence, an autoimmune type of disease. But the idea here is that there's a mechanism of inflammation, but that inflammation on some people begins to turn and begins to increase the degenerative process. And so what we need to change the paradigm is that it's not only inflammation as the cause of, most diseases, but it's also this inflammation turning on the body, which is creating an autoimmune mechanism, just like sugar is a mechanism and oxygen utilization. And so the whole idea is that we should be screening not just for named diagnoses, of which there are you know, a handful of autoimmune. But it does seem like autoimmune is a mechanism of the body and a protective mechanism. And so that's kind of, you know, the whole paradigm shift is to expand the idea of autoimmune to just these named diagnoses. One of the things with autoimmunity, you know, when you're looking at a framework for treatment, you know, where you can, you know, begin to help yourself, is that we call it the Autoimmune Triad. There's three components. There's a genetic component, meaning you do have a predisposition, but as most people know today, whether or not that gene is going to be expressed depends on a couple other factors. The second part of the autoimmune triad is your gut, because 70–80% of your immune system, you know, is housed in the gastrointestinal tract. So this, in essence, is where all of this overzealous inflammatory response is coming from the food we're eating, etc. And then third are triggers. So by far the number one trigger for autoimmunity, disease in general, longevity, is choice. The choices you make on diet and lifestyle. But let's just say that you are eating healthy and you are exercising. The next level of triggers that seem to spark autoimmunity are really anything that can really agitate the immune system. So this would be infections and environmental, you know, toxins. And most people with autoimmune, when you dig deeper, you're going to see some of these hidden infections, environmental, you know, toxicity, you know, loads. And again, it's common sense that if these are going under the radar, you're having an increased inflammatory response, which is not just directly related to autoimmunity, but, you know, heart disease and diabetes and cancer. And so again, we're wanting to look at this from a different perspective. And at least that is what we see here in clinical practice. And that's also what research is actually showing too, is that this is a mechanism that really needs to be looked at rather than just, you know, these quote unquote named, you know, diagnoses. I'm going to pause there for a second. I don't know if there's any questions, but
yes, we did get one question. Heather, do you see that popping up on your screen?
So, yeah, so we have, how specific and how sensitive are these biomarkers for autoimmunity?
Yeah, that's a really excellent question, because they are not sensitive at all unless you are in your fourth-ish decade of life. It almost seems like the autoimmune markers, especially in the traditional blood panels like through LabCorp and Quest, are extremely binary. You either have it or you don't, and there's no gray zone in between. But like, as an example, somebody has a family history, their mom has Hashimoto's and their sister has Hashimoto's, and they are 22 and they're having thyroid issues. Those autoimmune markers won't show up. They're not sensitive yet until they're in their 40s. So they're not very sensitive. There are, however, more advanced labs that do more sensitive autoimmune testing. And just to name one of them as an example, there's a company called Cyrex, C-Y-R-E-X, and they do a lot of more specialized kind of autoimmune testing. If the tests are positive in the blood, then you have it. However, if they're negative, it could still be either way. So it still wants to be in the differential diagnosis. And that might be a little confusing, but if it's positive, it's obviously there. But if it's negative, that doesn't necessarily mean that it is not something that should be treated or looked at, or, like I said, kept in the differential diagnosis. So in some ways, the tests are not great, but it's the best, you know, that you have if you're wanting insurance, you know, to pay for it, because some of these more advanced testing can be kind of costly, you know, too.
So, Dr. Repole, you know, you mentioned that you know, infections and environmental toxins can kind of spark that inflammatory response and kind of start that process of the autoimmune process. Where does stress come into that? Where does stress come into play with autoimmune disease?
So there, above your kidneys sits the adrenal glands, and they squirt out a couple of different hormones. One of them is called cortisol, and this is pretty fascinating. With in autoimmune, for example, one of the treatments that almost every autoimmune patient gets is a steroid. And cortisol, which is the stress hormone, it regulates your sleep, it regulates your energy, it regulates the inflammatory response on the body. That's why if you have a knee injury, you get a cortisone injection, which is a derivative of cortisol. So what happens with a lot of autoimmune patients is that sometimes they're going to get into, and this is really not the greatest diagnosis, but it kind of just puts the point, but some people get, adrenal fatigue, right? Where your cortisol levels are tanked, where they're not strong enough. But that basically means that your internal production of steroids is not available. So if a person has a predisposition for autoimmunity and they have a stress response and their cortisol levels are low, they don't have a check on the immune system to control the inflammatory response. And then if you top that with, sedentary lifestyle and not going outside with another hormone that regulates the inflammatory response called vitamin D, so if you have low vitamin D levels and low cortisol levels, yeah, you really don't have a good check, on the immune system. Stress, when I think of stress, we are always exposed to stressors, and they come in different flavors. There's physical stressors, emotional, mental, and how your body actually responds to that is really the crux. So you can have what's called eustress with an E, U-S-T-R-E, which is good stress like exercise. You can have distress, which is non-nourishing relationships or unhealthy diet. And then when we talk about the longevity piece, there's something called hermetic stress, which is this special type of stress, which is, you could think of it, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, or small things giving a larger than expected result, like a vaccine. The small amount of something that would potentially harm you in a larger dose in a smaller amount gives you immunity. Not getting involved in the vaccine debate, but the original idea of a vaccine of giving a small amount to kind of, conjure up the immune system for protection. So hermetic stress is another one. So stress in general, if it is a distress, is going to lower, your cortisol levels potentially. If it's prolonged, stress. But there is good stress too. And again, like I said, exercise is a very good stress. And then from a hermetic standpoint, this is where, we've been doing a lot of treatment here with these ideas of trying to really stimulate, the body to move from maintenance, one step forward, one step back, to can we take the body 2 steps forward, 3 steps forward? And hermetic stress is really one of the keys for that, because the first thing that happens is you get cleanup, which is called autophagy, where your body just cleans up all the dead cells. They're called senescent or zombie-like cells. But then after that, you get what's called stem cell production, which is regeneration. Because the idea is not to return a patient back prior to their signs and symptoms, but it's to actually transcend them past their current reality to a more transcendent or healthier version of themselves, with new tissue. And just to give an example of, some hermetic stressors that you can utilize with patients, it's everything from plain old exercise, special types of oxygen type of therapy, hypoxia, decreased oxygen, or over oxygen, saturation, fasting, intermittent fasting, prolonged fasting. If done appropriately, all of these have evolutionary threads in our DNA to turn on really these anti-aging and longevity genes. Because in essence, the disease today that's keeping us stuck and not moving into a regeneration or transcendent reality is comfort. We live in Florida, but we have the same temperature all year round, 75 degrees in our house. We have no issues with food. We're eating all the time. We are not exposed to these very special types of stressors, you know, feasting and famine, or extremes of temperature, extremes of oxygen, because we live a very, very comfortable life. So the window of tolerance stays so small. And so a lot of these good stressors grow this window of tolerance over time, and it makes you stronger and stronger and more resilient. And yeah, it's a pretty, you know, big topic, stress in general, but it's, I think, important to distinguish, you know, that there are those three types of stressors, and the ones that are usually demonized is really that distress, right? Which is a lot of times coming from a sedentary lifestyle and really just, you know, not eating, frankly, enough fruits and vegetables, you know, where it's a huge deficiency right now with almost every single person that walks in here is, you know, struggling really, because they want the comfort of fast food and the comfort foods, you know, too, that they're, you know, kind of used to.
Yeah, that makes sense. I feel like we could have a whole other discussion about just the therapies you're using between the oxygen and the exercise and the fasting and the diet. That would be really interesting to be able to have a second discussion that's more in depth about that, because Heather and I have, obviously we focus on plant-based, but we've also kind of been using fasting as well. And it really makes, I think, a big difference. And I've noticed a difference in my blood work and how I feel. And I've only done the fasting mimicking diet. Heather's done actual fasting. It really, that whole science is really interesting.
It really is, yeah.
Are you using all of these protocols in the office now, to where you're kind of taking a look at what the person is dealing with, and then you're giving them whichever protocol you feel like fits best, or using all of the protocols together?
Yeah, my framework is, you know, really simple. It's funny, the more I've been in practice, the simpler the protocols get, or the ideas get. But again, going back to the Stephen Covey idea, first things first, second things second. So patient that, you know, works with us, they have to commit to the fundamentals for 30 days, which is diet, lifestyle, and the third one is self-care practices, which is, we define as anything that nourishes the mind, body, soul. This could be whatever you want to do, you know, whether it's meditation or, you know, sleep hygiene, but they really need to commit to those three things. And then we begin the individual layering process. You know, here's the whole food plan, you know, because pretty much there's a detox that happens when a person just switches their diet to a whole food plant-based diet. But then if it's not working, you have to individualize the diet, individualize the exercise, individual the self-care practices. And then you can begin to layer on some of these more adjunct therapies that begin to have a compounding effect, right? Where diet has one effect, diet and exercise has a compounding effect. Diet, exercise, and oxygen therapy and putting intuitive fasting begins to really, really take a person's health, you know, to the next level. But yeah, if a person is starting from kind of a degeneration quality or catabolic, the first step is to kind of just get them square. And then once they're there, we can begin the process of, you know, taking them again, one step, two steps forward. And some people, unfortunately, will stay stuck in the fundamentals for a very long time. And that's okay. You know, that's okay. You know, we meet people where they're at. But yeah, we try to combine it. We always teach patients what they want. We always teach patients what they need, but we always give them what they want. And that's kind of the motto, you know, too. But yeah, for a lot of patients, we're combining. And for some people, it's a daily, weekly practice of just coaching and trying to make it work as best as it can.
That makes total sense. I love that. I love that protocol. We have a few more questions. Okay, let's see. Is there evidence-based practice to support fasting, and what are the different types of fasting? So definitely a lot of questions about fasting. And I know from my own experience, there's so many studies coming out about fasting, but specific question about evidence-based practice.
And especially maybe anything you've heard or seen related to fasting and either longevity or autoimmune as well.
Sure. So again, it's a pretty big topic, but I'll try to keep, maybe a 10,000 foot view to kind of keep it, pretty simple. The first thing is to recognize that if you're eating all the time, and some people, maybe their personality or that might be okay for that particular individual. But you have to understand, even most of the healing happens when a person's sleeping, right? Which is basically when the body's at rest. If you're constantly eating, what happens is the body is just, all of the energy is going to assimilation, digestion, and it's just nonstop. And that's okay if you want to stay one step forward, kind of one step back all the time. So the first thing is getting rid of, snacking, right? There's some, just beginning the process of not grazing all day. The second thing is what you've heard, or most people have heard, is called intermittent fasting, which you're really taking some punctuated times throughout the day or week where you're giving your body a break. And there's really, I don't think any controversy over the fact that giving your GI system rest periods is a huge benefit, for the human body. The one thing is, though, you can pick up all sorts of, fasting books, from, the 1 hour eating window and the 16-8 hour window. But the goal is to make it intuitive, right? So, for one person, it may be an eating window of 4 to 6 hours a couple times a week. For another person, they might do intermittent fasting for a long period of, maybe every day. But that really needs to be, customized. So I really encourage people, whatever book you pick up in the bookstore, that particular dietary approach or intuitive or that fasting protocol is what worked for that person. So you want to make sure that you're intuitively using the fasting principles and also checking the blood work and urine to kind of make sure that it's actually, working for you and not against you. So, intermittent fasting will give you a certain level of benefit long-term, as will a plant-based diet, because they are not making the gastrointestinal system work as hard, right? Big difference if you leave a banana out, it digests itself. Box of pasta could stay like that for 10 years. And so the GI system just doesn't have to work as hard. And it's the same thing. You're freeing up energy for digestion. You're freeing up that energy for regeneration and for healing. And then we start to get into prolonged fasting. And this is where, research from Dr. David Sinclair and Dr. Walter Longo, who wrote the Fasting Mimicking Diet, and they're all basically saying very similar things, that if you take a prolonged fast, 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 5 day, you begin to tap into what we talked about before, which is those mechanisms that do not get turned on unless a person is doing a true fast, which again, the mechanisms are autophagy, cleanup, and then making room for new cells. Right? You basically take out the old to make room for the new. And so, I think the fasting mimicking diet is something to look into, where they're, fasting, 5 days a month. I'm not necessarily a big proponent of the Prolon diet, the box that is given, because it's a lot of it's processed foods. You can do these type of fasting mimicking diets for pennies, at home, which if we had time, I can go into, how you do that, but you do not, need to buy an expensive $200-300 box, to do some of these protocols. And by the way, fasting mimicking diet is basically can you gain the benefit of water fasting by still eating? So in other words, they're making you eat about 700 calories a day for 5 days, keeping it very high fat oriented to keep you in a ketotic environment so you can actually spark those autophagy and those stem cell production, very similar to like, what water fasting, does. But yeah, the research in this is just exploding. And, I think that the two people I mentioned, those are good doctors or scientists to kind of look into, because their books will provide a little bit more detailed information, too. But you always want to customize it, because there is no one specific way of doing this. There's lots of different ways.
Mm-hmm. And I know David Sinclair is associated with Harvard, so I think you can find information about him through Harvard Medical School. And then I think Dr. Walter Longo is associated with the University of Southern California. I think that's where he's done a lot of his studies. So yeah, it is fascinating. We need a whole other interview time to be able to talk more about that. So I think from now, though, because it's gone by so fast, we'd love to ask you some information about your favorite local restaurants and a few other things. So we're going to do kind of like a rapid fire question session right now. And then if people have more questions, we can always send those to you afterwards. So our first rapid fire question would be, what's your favorite local restaurant to go to, and what do you eat there?
Okay, so I'll answer. I think it might be easier to answer like what meals I like, at different restaurants. But I love Thai food. There's the Thai house, I believe, on San Jose and Mandarin that I often frequent. But my favorite, dish is the the red curry dishes. They're very simple. They're tofu and veggies cooked in coconut milk. I love Indian food. I love ethnic restaurants. I love Indian food. There's a dish, or there's a place again in Mandarin called Masalas. It's an Indian restaurant, and they cater to making a lot of the dishes with coconut milk instead of dairy products. But I like Aloo Palak, which is a cream-based spinach with potatoes and coconut milk. And then Mediterranean restaurants are really fun because you can just order all of the starters and kind of make a big meal of, the grape leaves and the hummus and the tabbouleh. And yeah, I love ethnic restaurants, but those would be my favorites.
Love it.
I love it.
Yeah, if you guys haven't been to Nora's, I think there's one down by Dawn and Julington Creek area, and then there's one up by me at University in San Jose. But Nora's Cafe is really good for Mediterranean. Yeah, awesome. Okay, so what is your favorite minimally processed packaged food products? So if you're going to go to the store and you're going to find something that, isn't in the produce section, what's something that, and typically these are sort of saving on time usually, but what's your favorite minimally processed packaged food? So I don't eat processed meals, but snacks. I can give snack. Yeah. I can't remember the name of the brand, but it's quinoa, almost like a rice cake, but it's made from quinoa, and really that's the only ingredient that's in it. But to be honest, my most simplest, go-to is an avocado with salt and pepper. Just opening up an avocado and eating it. But and then of course I love chocolate, and so chocolate is always a good one. But yeah, I don't do a lot of the meals, but snacks for sure. The quinoa puffs. And again, I can't remember the name of it, so sorry. That's all good. It's all good.
Okay. So how do you save time when you're trying to, if you've got people in your clinic saying, okay, I want to eat plant-based, but it seems like it takes so much time. What are the time-saving hacks that you give them?
Yeah, so I'm here as a representative of the bachelor and bachelorette style cooking. And I've done that for 20 years, so I'm not a chef. I eat extremely healthy, but it's so simple the way I eat, which for some people, and I think one of the hacks is mindset, in the sense that we have to get away from the idea that breakfast is cereal and lunch is a sandwich and dinner is pasta and it makes you fall asleep. Where we're kind of embracing these, you can eat breakfast for dinner and dinner for breakfast, so there's no really distinguishing. But you have to have a smoothie recipe, you have to have a salad recipe, and you have to have a one pot meal. And we always encourage patients, as far as for cost goes, to really stick with, plant-based foods are not expensive. Getting sweet potatoes and fingerling potatoes and your rice varieties and quinoas are not very expensive. And so, yeah, those are definitely ways to kind of save, on cost, is by not buying a lot of the package and buying more of the bulk items. I think that's a good way to save money.
Yeah. And sometimes this next question is sort of lumped in with the previous one, but what are your best plant-based time hacks? Like, how do you save time?
Yeah. So part of it is just, having a plan for the week, just an extra 15 minutes or 30 minutes on Sunday, thinking about what you're about to embark on for the week and what's coming up. Because the thing is, when you're tempted, there's nothing you can do about it, right? The goal is to prevent than to treat, especially when we have cravings. So, I think that, again, coming back to, what is really to make sure that you have preparation for quote unquote healthy fast food meals. And again, I would kind of revert back to these one pot meals and the salads and the smoothies, and encourage patients or encourage people to, we all have healthy meals somewhere in our repertoire. And I think it's important to first healthify them and then plantify them. And so, healthify them to me means, loading up half to 3/4 of a plate with vegetables, and then eventually switching that over to really making the whole plate, more, plant-based. But time hacks is having meals that are not necessarily you need to cook, but they're putting together type of meals. You're putting stuff in a blender, pressing a button. You're putting stuff in a bowl and mixing it. You're putting stuff like for a salad, and then you're putting stuff in your one pot meal together and cooking it all together, and having those ingredients ready, and not getting overwhelmed with thousands of recipes, because that's not needed in the beginning. You only need, a handful of recipes to kind of get started, with moving into that, plant-based realm.
Well, and I was just talking to somebody today, and she said she does not like cooking. And so what she'll do is the smoothies and stuff, and then she'll buy some of the pre-made salad mixes and then just add, some stuff to it, maybe some like nuts or something like that. And I think maybe she, just tries to keep a super simple dressing. Like I've got a 3-ingredient apple cider dressing that I use, but I love your idea of just keeping it really simple and having just a few recipes in your back pocket. And how I handle that is I have on my phone, I have a list of those. And then when I can't think of what to make, I go to my phone and I'm like, oh yeah, I remember I have all the stuff for that. But I think people get super overwhelmed with the idea of meal prepping all day on Sunday. So I also love your idea of just spend Sunday just thinking about it. And maybe that will I think that definitely helps, just having like an idea of what you're going to make that week. So I think those are really awesome.
And I forgot to mention Daily Harvest. One of, sorry, my phone's ringing in my office. I apologize.
Oh, okay.
But, you know, the one thing, you know, Daily Harvest is a meal prep program where, you know, they make these very simple bowls and they're very simplified ingredients. But one of the things if you do order from like a Daily Harvest or one of these, you know, food companies that are making some of these products, you can get, you know, a stack of 6 or 7 or 8 of these bowls, keep them in the freezer. But the key is, you know, you would obviously take it out, you know, the night before, so you thaw it out. But you get a big bowl. There's not a lot of vegetables in these bowls, but the bowl literally becomes the salad dressing in some ways. So you get a big bowl and you put in all your greens in there, salad, cut it up, and you don't have to do anything other than just put it in a bowl and cut it up with a scissor, and then take the Daily Harvest, throw it right in, and it's a meal. It's the salad dressing, and you got all the greens in there. But if you're using some of these meal programs, that's the one thing that's missing, is that you want to make sure you're adding in the greens and use the bowl as a salad dressing. That is one of the quickest ways to kind of eat, and eat pretty healthy too. And that's a really quick way, you know, of time hacking, you know, for you don't know what to eat for dinner sometimes.
That's a really good tip.
Yeah.
Okay, Heather, what do we have?
All
Let's
right.
see, you're up.
So, you know, it's one thing, you know, there's a lot of people who get into this and they buy into it. I mean, obviously we're preaching to the choir. It makes sense to us. And there's others that are like, you know, I get this. I think this is what I need. And they know what they want to do, but doing it is really hard. You know, there's a million reasons why. So when you have someone in your practice who you've been seeing and you know that they really want to make the changes that you're suggesting, but they keep stumbling, like, what is your advice for people when they're first starting out and they're trying to move in this direction?
Yeah, I mean, that's a excellent, you know, question. And unfortunately, it's normal. I think that's the first thing, is to kind of normalize that you know, there's no straight line to this. I mean, there are going to be ebbs and flows, to kind of get away from the black and white, you know, mentality that it's all or kind of a nothing approach. But we always go back to values. And, you know, the thing is that if we can tag what you're about to do as optimizing your life, because most people think when they're starting this journey, if for instance, I always tell them, if you come back in on the next visit and you feel that what you're about to embark on is deprivation, you're going to fail. If you think about what you're about to embark on as not deprivation, like, oh, he's taking away these foods, these meats, these, you know, these processed foods. If you can tag what you're about to do, not as deprivation, but as life-giving, it's a constant reminder to put your values in front of you so you can see it. And when you do falter and you fail, there's no shame or blame. The present moment exists again, and you're free to make a new choice. But I think if you have the compass that's always there for you, it's like, you know, the North Star. It's there. You're never going to reach it, but it should be there, and that will guide you if you falter. You know, you take a step backwards. So I would just say for people to be very kind with themselves, not to shame and blame. And it's progress, not perfection. And, you know, do it lovingly and kind of change the mindset around what you're embarking on. I think that is really the key. Mindset is, to me, you know, the biggest piece, and really understanding what your values are, what you're trying to get at doing this, I think, is an important part.
Yeah, that is, I love the shifting your mindset and your perspective. I think focusing on the foods that you're adding in and not the deprivation it definitely helps, because we always want what we can't have. So I think it's good to have that perspective. We did get a question really quick, and I know we want to be respectful of everybody's time, but we want to keep talking. So we do have a question about fresh greens. Do you have a source for fresh greens other than farmers markets? So I'd love to know your thoughts, and then I have an idea too.
The question was, where do you get the fresh greens?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, the obvious places, the grocery store, Whole Foods, and,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, farmers markets. We order sprouts from a local person in Switzerland, Jennifer Becker. So we'll order sprouts there. We try to support, some of the local, companies, as far as greens. There's a truck that delivers to Whole Foods once a week. Frog Farm, I think it's called. And
Frog Song Organic, I think is what they are. Frog Song. Yeah.
And they deliver on Thursday in the afternoon. So we picked up, produce, from there. But I would also encourage people not to make that, it's more important to be eating greens than, worrying that if you can't have access to, some of these local, places, you do the best that you can. But those are some of the ones that I'm familiar with. And of course, there's farmers markets too, around town.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know why, but I'm all over the place with that, because I go here for shopping, and then it doesn't seem like I'm in one place. I don't know why. That's just kind of the way it is. I'm not sure.
Yeah. I tell people, like, I use all those resources as well. And then, remembering we can use frozen too, because
Sure.
a lot of times if it's not in season, they'll pick it when it's the freshest, and then they'll flash freeze it, and you don't have to worry about degradation as far as like travel time and things like that. So a bunch of studies have been done that say it's just as good, sometimes even better than fresh. So sometimes I'll do frozen. And then I've also been experimenting with growing my own in the backyard. So I've got, if anyone wants cuttings of spinach tree called Chaya, I have that. And I've been doing some experimenting with growing that dinosaur kale year round. I just have to make sure it's really well watered in the summer, and then I just break off the bottom leaves. So that's been kind of fun too. So Heather, do you have any suggestions about greens?
No, I mean, I usually just buy it at the grocery store, farmers markets. Yeah, that's kind of where I'm at. So
Yeah.
I do like Sprouts. Every now and then I'll go to Sprouts, but I mean, it's very specific, but I really like that they have a spinach and arugula mix, and I really like that. So yeah. All right. So I already put in the chat your website, so that's where they can find you. I guess I would like to end on, what's your current passion project? What are you into right now?
So we've created a functional medicine training program, a 6-month program we're launching in January for practitioners and people health advocates who, I think that's one of the interesting things that I've seen over the years, is that people get so excited about reclaiming their health and they want to give back. And that's become a passion project. So we created a 6-month curriculum. We're applying for continuing education, and we're getting ready to launch that in January. And I finished my first book, and it's in the editor's hand, and that's been a love-hate relationship for the last 10 years. So that's kind of exciting. And yeah, so those are my 2 major passion projects right now.
Love it. Are there any events that we should know about and we can share with our members here?
We do, if they go to our Facebook page, Jacksonville Health and Wellness Center, we usually do, a free event pretty regularly, usually once a month. And that's probably the best way to keep updated, is on our Facebook page.
Okay, lovely. All right.
And what's the name of your book going to be when it comes out?
So that's still in the process, but how to quit disease before you get fired. Or another one is I to wait, illness to wellness. So we're kind of playing around with a bunch of titles right now. So
Cool.
which is fun. I'm just, going back and forth with what different types of titles. But yeah, it's funny because I've been working on that the last couple of weeks and it's been driving me crazy. So I'm like, oh my God, all the different names that I've written down. So yeah, that's still in progress.
Very
exciting. Very exciting.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. This just adds another great dinner with a doc lecture for the portfolio. And guys, it's going to be up. The replay is going to be up on Don's YouTube and my YouTube soon. So make sure you check that out. And I should have looked to see who was August. I don't remember right at this exact moment. Shame on me. Let me go look.
I know. I gotta look. Yeah.
I usually look beforehand. Dinner with a doc.
Let's see if I can get it up. Oh, Rashmi, you said is not able to make it.
Rashmi may not be able to make it. So we may have a surprise guest for next month.
Yeah. Yes. So stay tuned.
Stay tuned.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. We hope you have a great night.
Thank
you guys for all that you're doing. I really admire both of you guys and I appreciate the invite.
Thank you.
Yeah. Great to see you. Bye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Good night.
Bye.